Welcome to the Explainer. Right, let's jump straight in. Picture this. You're walking through the quiet, totally barren fields of Sihonia in Madhya Pradesh, India. Out of nowhere, you are suddenly confronted by this massive, towering, 1,000-year-old skeletal ruin. I mean, it literally looks like something ripped straight out of a high fantasy novel. This is the Kaknamath temple. It's a structure so incredibly baffling, so seemingly precarious, that just looking at it kind of plays tricks on your mind. It just sits there in absolute silence, completely daring us to figure out how it hasn't collapsed yet.
So let's talk about the elephant in the room. How exactly does a 1,000-year-old, 100-foot temple stay standing without a single drop of cement? Seriously, zero mortar. We're talking about massive, multi-ton stone blocks stacked incredibly high into the sky to form this giant 11th century monument, and they have survived a millennium with absolutely no binding slurry holding them together. Nothing. When you look up close and see the huge gaps between the stones, it looks unbelievably fragile. It looks like a strong breeze could knock it over, yet it completely refuses to fall.
Now, because it has this bizarre, almost unfinished look to it, the local folklore is just absolute gold. One really famous village legend says that the temple was built by ghosts. Yep, supernatural spirits supposedly stacked the whole thing in a single night. But as the story goes, the sun started to rise, the morning rooster crowed, and the spirits had to bail immediately, leaving the stones scattered and the spire totally incomplete. And then there's another story about a king's dream where Lord Shiva promised this magical construction, but on one condition: no human could watch. Well, a curious child peeked out a window, and poof, the celestial builders vanished on the spot.
Part 1. The Real Royal Builders, the Kaknamath Dynasty.
Okay, the ghost stories are fun, but the actual historical truth? It's honestly just as mind-blowing. Let's look at the verified timeline here. The temple was commissioned between 1015 and 1035 CE by King Kirchraj. He was part of the Kaknamath dynasty, which was this understudied but wildly ambitious medieval kingdom, and they considered this temple their absolute architectural masterpiece. And we know this for a fact because there's an explicit record carved into the Sasbahu Temple at Gwalior Fort. Fast forward a bit to 1440 CE, and we find pilgrimage records etched right into Kakanmath's pillars, so it was still a thriving hotspot centuries later. But around 1508 CE, things get really grim. The area was hit by severe invasions and iconoclasm, which caused massive damage, and that finally brings us to today, where it's a highly protected monument under the Archaeological Survey of India.
So, back to our big question. How was this giant thing actually built? Well, it all comes down to some next-level engineering. The builders used an ancient, classical technique known as dry stone masonry. Basically, it means absolutely no binding agents. You don't glue the stones together. Instead, you rely 100% on the exact calculated placement of the stones. You're essentially leveraging gravity to do all the heavy lifting for you.
I mean, how do you keep a literal mountain of loose rock from blowing over in a nasty storm? You use trebeated, or post and beam engineering. The Kaknamath builders used dead weight compression and this incredibly precise geometric interlocking. The friction between the stones is what stops them from sliding horizontally. But the real stroke of genius here? They clustered 16 massive columns into 4 quadrants right in the central hall. That brilliantly takes all the crushing downward thrust of the heavy stone spire and pushes it outward across the wide base. Believe it or not, it actually makes the building highly elastic, so it can literally absorb seismic shockwaves.
And we really need to wrap our heads around the scale of this place. 100 feet. That was the staggering original height of the Shikhara, the main temple spire. Just imagine for a second trying to stack loose, shifting stones to the height of a modern 10-story building with zero cement. Even today, with the very top missing, that skeletal core still soars nearly 100 feet into the air, completely dominating the flat, barren Chambal Valley landscape around it.
Part 2. Surviving Time in Turmoil, Scars of the Centuries.
You see, the temple we're looking at today, it looks nothing like it did back in the 11th century. It literally is an exposed skeleton. The reason the locals thought it was left incomplete by ghosts is actually because of centuries of brutal destruction. We're talking massive geological shifts and devastating earthquakes that literally shook the heavy, beautifully ornate outer stone casing right off, sending those carved balconies crashing down into the dirt. So what we see now is just the rough, terrifyingly bare inner core of red and gray sandstone. Add in the medieval Islamic iconoclasm, where invaders methodically defaced the deities and severed their limbs to break their ritual purity, and you start to understand the very real, very deep scars this monument carries.
But here's the thing. Despite all of that destruction, the raw beauty of the ruins still completely stops people in their tracks today.
The host of the channel Travel Janoon said it perfectly when he visited. How to describe its beauty? Kamalhe. It is an absolute marvel. It's so true. You just stand there and feel this profound sense of awe at the sheer audacity of those ancient engineers.
And the intricate artwork that did manage to survive tells this amazing story of religious fluidity. The temple was undeniably dedicated to Lord Shiva. I mean, there's a massive linga still sitting deep inside the sanctum, but the surrounding debris proves the artisan guilds were super inclusive. They carved this massive universe of celestial musicians and diverse deities. Actually, one of the most unique surviving fragments is a carving of Mahavishnu holding both his conch and his discus awkwardly in a single hand. That is a massive iconographic rarity. It just shows how the builders were blending strict sectarian lines to create this unified spiritual masterpiece.
Part 3. A skeletal masterpiece.
Because originally, this wasn't just a building. It was a deeply psychological journey, set out on a very strict, sacred axis. Imagine being a medieval pilgrim. You'd ascend the steps into the entrance porch, the Mukhamandapa. Then you'd move into the dark, pillar-heavy inner hall, the Gudamandapa. You'd pause at the highly restrictive threshold of the vestibule, the Antarala, and finally you'd stand before the totally dark expanse of the inner sanctum, the Garbhagriha. And the crazy part, even in its ruined state today, you can trace that exact path. You're walking the exact same steps a pilgrim walked 1,000 years ago. Now, if you visit today, you might notice some of the finest, most elite details seem to be missing. But it's for a very good reason. To protect the site's most vulnerable sculptures from smugglers and the harsh elements, the Archaeological Survey of India systematically extracted them. For example, those monumental, highly stylized stone lions that used to guard the entrance steps, they were carefully moved, and they now stand watch over the Archaeological Museum inside Gwalior Fort. It's a tough compromise for sure, but it's absolutely necessary to make sure this art survives for another 1,000 years.
Which leaves us with this one wild final thought. We're looking at Kakanmath, a structure entirely stripped of its outer shell, a building that has weathered brutal earthquakes, relentless invasions, and time itself. And it's held together by absolutely nothing but brilliant geometry and gravity. So, if an ancient kingdom could build a mountain of shifting stone that outlasts its own history, what other forgotten marvels are out there right now just hidden in plain sight, waiting for us to decode their secrets? Keep that curiosity alive, and thank you so much for joining me on this explainer.